I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's a little neighborhood called Squirrel Hill that is like Jews everywhere. It is amazing. One of my favorite parts about having lived in Squirrel Hill is Shabbos morning, Saturday morning, seeing folks all over walking to shul, walking home from shul is fantastic. So when I came to Austin and there was one conservative shul and one minyan in town, it was very different.
This is the Book of Life. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. Before I tell you about Almost a Minyan, I want to share with you how excited I am about the new digital voice recorder I've just ordered. For any podcasting nerds who are interested, it's a Zoom H4n SP that I'm getting to replace the Olympus LS10 that I bought in 2008, which was developing a hiss. A big thanks goes out to my Patreon patrons who offset the cost of this purchase. I want to thank Jenny Gates-Beckman, Leah Berkowitz, Christine Ertl, and April Halpern-Wayland. Author Suzanne Nelson is still ready and waiting to send autographed copies of Serendipity's Footsteps to new patrons, so if you enjoy the show, it would be lovely to have your support, and lovely to be able to thank you with a copy of this great book. Now, let's talk about Almost a Minyan. Almost a Minyan is a picture book about a young Jewish girl reaching the age where she can help her community pray, and it's a story that's traditional and groundbreaking at the same time. Author Lori S. Kline and publisher Debra Winegarten got together at Lori's house in Austin, Texas, where I interviewed them together by phone. Almost a Minyan is also the 2017 Children's Book Pick for the Jewish Women's Archive Virtual Book Club. Visit jwa.org or follow the link at bookoflifepodcasts.com to find discussion questions to share with the young readers in your life. Lori, give us a brief description of Almost a Minyan.
Well, it's a coming-of-age story. There's a girl in a small town. They have just one shul, and it's often difficult for them to get that required quorum, the 10 people, 10 adult Jews needed to make a minyan whereby they can say certain prayers. And the girl's excited that someday she soon will be able to be part of that minyan, and she and her father have a special closeness between them that will hopefully soon bring them together in the minyan itself.
Can you define what a minyan is for any listeners who might not be familiar?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking, Heidi. A minyan is a gathering of 10 adult Jews, and an adult Jew is a girl over the age of 12 and a boy over the age of 13. And only by having this quorum of 10 individuals can you say certain prayers, such as the reading of the Torah or the prayer that the mourners say on the anniversary of an immediate family member's death or for the year following an immediate family member's death. There's also the individual, what we call Amidah, which is the silent prayer of devotion, which we can say silently individually, but to have it sung aloud, we also have to have that quorum of 10 individuals.
Can you talk about the significance of the minyan in Jewish life?
I think that Judaism is very much a communal religion. There's the covenant between God and the Jewish people. It's not just a religion based on a one-on-one relationship between the people and God as individuals. And it's very important to us as a community to be there for each other. And that support often takes the form of a minyan. We're there for each other to celebrate as part of perhaps a bris or perhaps as a bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, a wedding. And in prayer, there are certain things that we need to be supportive of, like the mourner's kaddish, the mourner's prayer, and it's important that we have at least 10 people to show the support to the mourner.
The words bat mitzvah are not mentioned in this book, but that's basically what's happening. The girl is old enough to read from the Torah as an adult. Is there a difference between becoming a bat mitzvah and joining a minyan?
That's also a good question. By default, once a girl becomes 12, she does become bat mitzvah. And it's the same for a boy. Once he becomes 13, he is bar mitzvah. There's this beautiful ceremony that recognizes that time, and there are prayers that are certainly associated with that. But she will count for a minyan once she reaches that age. And at that age, she can read Torah. And incidentally, it is kind of interesting that while there are many prayers that an individual cannot do until they are an adult member of the community, reading Torah in and of itself you can do before you become bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah.
Well, that's interesting. So which activities are all right to do at any age, and which activities are restricted to adults?
Wow, there are a bunch. So the blessing that you do before the Torah, you can only do once you are becoming bar bat mitzvah. But the reading of the Torah you can do when you're younger. Leading services, it's a mixed bag of tricks. So for educational purposes, let's say, if you were going to a Jewish day school, for example, they'll have kids lead part of the services as an educational means. But to lead services in the main sanctuary, you would need to wait until you have become bar bat mitzvah. There are parts of the service, like the ashrei, it's a psalm that they will pull kids up for, so they get some experience up on the bima, where the prayer leaders stand. They get some experience being up there, but to lead the prayer service, you need to have reached the bar bat mitzvah age.
This book is written from an insider point of view, but it also includes a glossary, which is helpful from an outsider point of view. Talk about how you settled on the correct balance of assuming the reader has some inside knowledge, but providing some structure and framework for them.
Well, I originally wrote it, Heidi, from a very inside point of view. I had shared the book with a few friends, and then like the shampoo commercial, and they shared it, and they shared it, and they shared it, and then I started getting wonderful feedback about how it was reaching more people's heartstrings than just that of the immediate Jewish community, and that led me to create a glossary that would hopefully explain to folks who weren't part of the Jewish community what those sprinkled words throughout the book meant.
Okay. So I live in South Florida, where it's very easy to find other Jews. Talk about the basis for the community in this story, where it's hard to gather even 10 Jewish adults. Do you or have you lived in a community like that?
Yes, I have, and that's a lot of where this came from. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's a little neighborhood called Squirrel Hill that is like Jews everywhere. It is amazing. One of my favorite parts about having lived in Squirrel Hill is Shabbos morning, Saturday morning, seeing folks all over walking to shul, walking home from shul is fantastic. And that's one of the things that I miss about living in Pittsburgh and living in Squirrel Hill, besides, of course, my beautiful nieces who are now 6 and 3. So when I came to Austin and there was one conservative shul and one minyan in town, it was very different. And at that time, actually, we had the difficult time making a minyan, and women didn't count in the minyan. I had only been here a few years when that changed, but it was very surprising to me. I had never encountered something like that. And that spurred me to start thinking about that and got the wheels turning in my head to start doing some writing.
Besides gathering a minyan, what are the challenges of living in such a small Jewish community?
Well, I suppose there's always the challenge for single folks in the Jewish community to find each other. But there's, I think, more of a challenge for folks of like mind to find groups that really fit the type of observance that works for them. So, for example, where my brother, Avoshalom, he was a conservative rabbi, and he was a rabbi at a very large shul in Highland Park, and it was easy for them to have their main service and then a smaller minyan. When he was at the seminary in New York, they could have an egalitarian minyan and different minyanim. But when you've got a smaller city, you've got your minyan, and that's it. And it's hard to break off into a living room minyan or different observances that have smaller groups of people because you just don't have that base. You don't have that critical mass that you would have somewhere else.
This book matter-of-factly turns tradition on its head by depicting an egalitarian, observant Jewish community in which there is no struggle for girls and women to be accepted as full participants in spiritual life. How realistic is this portrayal?
You know, that's a really good question, and it's interesting that the book didn't start out that way. The book started out being about a boy, and the book started out at a time where it was inconceivable that a girl would lay tefillin. It just didn't happen. And then over the course of the years, things started changing. And I was leading Tot Shabbat services at our shul for years when my son was younger. And I was writing plays each week for the Parsha, the portion of the week. And a good friend of mine, Rabbi Rachel Kobrin, said to me, you know, if you write a play for each portion of the year, I will be sure that it gets published. And that made me start thinking about my story. And she and I started talking about the story, and she brought up the idea that if I decided to change the protagonist to a female, that would really be an amazing idea. And I had never even entertained the thought, and we got to talking and thinking, and here we are today. It's a good question as to how the more traditional congregations will react to it, and only time will tell.
Debra, can you also share your thoughts on the egalitarian nature of the community in this story?
So at our shul here in Austin, we have women who wear tefillin, so it never even occurred to me that this was going to be an issue with people. I was raised very secular, very reformed, so I came to conservative later in life. I started going to Minyan after my mother died to say Kaddish, and then after you do that daily for 11 months, you know, it sticks, and so you become a regular.
Have you had any pushback from readers?
I haven't had pushback from readers about women wearing talis and tefillin. The pushback has been, interestingly, women saying, I don't want to have to go to daily Minyan. I have enough to do with raising the kids, cooking all the meals, keeping don't make me take on something else, and I'm not obligated to. The men have a hard enough time doing it on their own. They should do it. Leave me out of it.
Okay, that's interesting. It's not the kind of pushback I would have expected.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, I had New York Jewish women saying, I'm going to buy 10 copies and I'm going to go and hand it out in the street corners of the Orthodox communities. So I think there's going to be some conversation about it. We'll see. It's going to be fun.
How did you first find this book? Was it submitted to you, or did you solicit it, or how did it get into your publishing house?
At Minyan, one day, Lori came to me. We have Torah studies on Friday after morning Minyan. So after Torah studies, she said, hey, I have this children's book I've written. I need some advice on publishers. We set up a time for her to come over to my house. So the morning that she was going to come over to my house, I had this conversation with myself. I said, Debster, you have way too much to do on your plate. No matter what she brings, no matter how amazing it is, you send her to Carbin Publishing. They're the best Jewish children's book publishers. They'll take care of her. So Lori comes over to the house. It's a nice fall day in Austin, pretty warm. So we sit on the front porch, and she runs in the house to use the restroom. And I read the book while she's in there. She comes out, and I'm crying. And before I knew what happened, I said, I'm publishing this. Because part of my business model is that a book has to move me. It has to touch me in a deep way, or I'm not doing it. Because when I publish a book, it is a huge commitment. I'm taking on a lot of responsibility financially, but also emotionally, and it's almost like having a kid. You put everything into it. The Highlights Foundation has a Writing Jewish-themed children's book workshop that Barbara Krasner puts on. I had met Susan Simon, this amazing illustrator there, a couple of years before, and I had said to myself when I saw Susan's work, I'm like, oh my God, if I ever have a children's book, I'm going to hire this woman because her stuff is genius. And so right after I told Lori I'd published, I'm like, oh my God, I know the illustrator. And I said to Lori, I said, shake my hand, I'm going to give you a contract on the spot. It was Bashir. It totally was. And I have never fallen out of love with this book. I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud, and I'm so honored that Lori trusted me with her book that Susan took a chance with me, the illustrator took a chance with me with her artwork, because I've never done this before, and we'll see.
What was it about the book that made you cry when you first read it?
There's a scene in there where the father wraps the little girl in his father's tallis. And it's just this beautiful coming together story. And this was before the illustrations, but I could just feel the tallis around my shoulders, and I could feel the love. And I never knew my grandfathers, so I never even had that experience. And my father's not religious, so there was no way he would do that. But that was the first point. And then at the very end, when it's clear that the girl makes a minyan and she counts. When I grew up, we didn't count as a minyan. And I grew up in a very feminist household. So to be able to give that message to little girls, you count. Not only do you count in minyan, but you count in life. Could that message be more timely today? 100%. So that's what touched me.
It's also notable that the community and even the family of the protagonist in this book include a variety of racial features. There are white characters, there are black characters, there are some who appear to be biracial. This is completely unmentioned by the text. So, Lori, I'm wondering if the idea came from the illustrator, or was it part of your original plan, and what was behind this unusual decision?
The illustrator had a very distinct vision in her mind when she went to illustrate the book. And one of the challenges for me as an author was that I didn't even realize that when I wrote the book, I had a vision of what my characters would look like. So when she brought those pictures in, I was very surprised. And there was a process of us coming together to bring the book to its fruition and its final project of how it looks now. She brought out something that really hasn't been portrayed in Jewish life before.
Debra, since the racial portrayals of the characters were not Lori's idea, tell us a little bit more about where that came from.
Sure. So Lori brought me the book about, I would say, 2.5 years ago. At the time, there was this huge conversation in children's book publishing about diversity, and that there weren't people of color, that was something that was missing in children's literature. And so I got this great idea. I'm like, oh, my God, let's put some people of color in the book. And then I had a conversation with Lori, and she was like, yeah, but no. Because, we live in Austin. We're looking around our congregation. We have a couple of African-American people. We have a few Hispanic people. We've got some Sephardic people. And then everyone else mostly looks Ashkenazi. So then I pulled in the illustrator, Susan Simon. And when she came back with the first set of illustrations for the book, they were black and white. It wasn't actually until she sent us the first set of color illustrations that we're like, oh, my God, she's made this family of mixed race. I'd actually sent her pictures of some people in my congregation that are very Sephardic with what, we call the Jew fro and very olive-complected skin. So we're having this big discussion between us, and then the illustrator sent me pictures of her family and her niece. And she's like, okay, I've modeled the character in the book after my niece, who's Sephardic, and then she sent me pictures of her grandfather, who was Turkish. And then the illustrator said, here's the deal. When I grew up, I wasn't white. And she grew up in America. She's like, Jews weren't white. Then I had to, of course, go online and find a book called When Jews Became White People. So it's a very interesting thing. And in the meantime, when I started showing the book to some of my female rabbis in the community, one of them just almost started crying. She said, oh, my God, you have no idea how many requests I have gotten from people saying, could you please have books showing Jews of color in it, because there's nothing portraying this. So at that moment, I realized, okay, it's time. When you go to Israel, we've got Ethiopian Jews who are very dark-skinned. So Jews come in all kinds of colors. I think in the United States for a long time, given the way that the United States was settled, we have a lot of Ashkenazi people, but I think that's changing a lot. And I think that it's an opportunity to open up, because remember, these kids today who knows what their communities are going to look like 20 years from now. This book may very well, in fact, reflect how it's going to be. So have I ever seen a community like this? No. Can I think that it would be possible? Absolutely.
The mission of Sociosites Press is to transform society one story at a time. Explain that. How do you want society to transform, and how can Sociosites Press help that happen?
So I'm a sociologist by training. That's my background. And for me, it's how I can practice tikkun olam in the world. It's how I can heal my own little corner of the world. I come from a very feminist background. My mother was like the mother of Texas women's history. She wrote 18 books on women in Texas history. And I have a big commitment to feminism, to women, but not only to women, but to people. And I know that one of the ways that we learn is through storytelling. When you look at the history of civilization, the way that we pass down our teachings and our traditions are through storytelling. If you think about people around a campfire telling stories, you think about the Torah being the oral tradition that was passed down through storytelling. And so this is just my own little way of carrying that on. When I choose a book, I only publish books that, for me, are transformative in some way, that there is something about it that wakes people up or says, there's another way of looking at the world. If one little girl reads it and it makes a difference in her life, then I'm happy.
All right, great. What else would you like to talk about that I haven't asked you?
Well, people can order the book from my website, sociosites.com. It's also going to be in Amazon and all the great places that books are sold. Bookstores can get it. Lori's going to be available if people want to bring her to their Jewish book fairs to give workshops to their kids on how to write books or their adults. As a publisher, I'm also happy to come in and give talks at Jewish book fairs about publishing. The illustrator, Susan Simon, said she would also be delighted to come have conversations. So I'm going to make all of us really available to get out into the world and share our gifts with people.
Is Sociosites Press specifically a Jewish publishing house?
No.
Is this the first Jewish book that you've done?
It's not the first Jewish book that I've done. It's the fourth Jewish book that I've done. So I've published my award-winning chapbook, There's Jews in Texas. I've published the sequel, Where Jewish Grandmothers Come From. I've published a book of poetry by Ahuva Bat Yashar called Meeting God at Midnight. That book won the Best Poetry Award from the Texas Association of Authors in 2012. So I specialize in Texas stuff and in Jewish stuff because I'm like a Texas Jew, so I kind of get all the identity stuff in there.
Lori, what else would you like to talk about that I haven't thought to ask you?
It's been quite an experience, and we learned about how publishing a book is not an individual sport, that it is quite a team effort. And I encourage people who have written manuscripts to go out there and keep trying because it can just be a very fulfilling, beautiful experience.
Okay, lovely. Lori and Debra, thanks so much for speaking with me.
Thank you for having me.
It's been really fun, Heidi. We appreciate the work you're doing out in the world and look forward to talking to you again. Take care.
This is Catriella Friedman. I'm the director of PJ Our Way. I'll be joining you soon on the Book of Life podcast. I'd like to dedicate my episode to Rosh Chodesh, the celebration of the Jewish month, really the celebration of the lunar month, because like the moon with its monthly disappearance and reappearance, that really exemplifies the Jewish people, both in their resilience and their ability to always renew and return, which actually really ties into the beauty of a good Jewish story and how it weaves together the theme of hope with reality.
If you enjoy the Book of Life podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/bookoflife. If you do, you'll get an autographed copy of Serendipity's Footsteps by Suzanne Nelson while supplies last. You can also help us out by leaving a review on iTunes or a comment on our blog at bookoflifepodcast.com. You can like our page at facebook.com/bookoflifepodcast or follow us at twitter.com/bookoflifepod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening and happy reading.